Hey guys, I hope you guys are doing well there without me. I'm sure I miss you guys a lot. I hate doing notes like this because I like asking you questions as I'm lecturing, and now I just have to talk at you. But nevertheless, here we are. As you can see, our next unit is cell division. Why must cells divide? You already have learned about cells and all the little organelles inside of them, the nucleus, the ribosomes. And this is all about why do they have to divide? And that means to make more of them. So you have a cell and it just splits into two. And for eukaryotes, which remember you are eukaryote, which means more complicated, you do mitosis. Sorry, that was my phone. You do mitosis as a way to grow and heal. Let me see if I can focus this a little better. I've started this like 5 times, so I really don't want to restart it. There we go. So mitosis, remember, is cell division. So why do we need to have a cell divide? Well, because we want to make more cells so that we can grow. We also need to make more cells to heal our body. So imagine, you don't have to draw this, but imagine if you had a bunch of cells, your skin cells per se, and you had a cut in your skin. And so you're going to need to fill that gap, obviously. So you're going to want those cells to divide and cover up that spot to heal your skin. So it's kind of fascinating that our body does that all on its own. Obviously, if it gets too severe, you can't really do anything about it. Your body can only do so much. But there are those organisms that, you know, you can cut off a whole limb and it will regrow that whole limb. So it's crazy. The other type of cellular division is called meiosis. And sometimes you'll hear people pronounce it, even me sometimes say meiosis, and that's not really the right way to pronounce it, but it's a way to kind of distinguish between the two, because when I say mitosis and meiosis, it sounds very similar. So sometimes you'll hear me say meiosis, but it's not, it's meiosis. But meiosis and mitosis sound a lot alike. But this is just another type of cellular division. And this one makes sperm and egg. So if this process is making sperm and egg, then it would make sense that the purpose of this is for sexual reproduction, so that organisms can sexually reproduce. So those are the 2 types of cellular division that eukaryotes go through. But simple organisms, prokaryotes, and some eukaryotes will do something else called binary fission. Remember, I like to connect my R's to letters for some reason. Yes, that's binary. So, and that's like a lot like mitosis. And that's something bacteria do so that they can perform asexual reproduction. And so you will literally just have a bacteria cell with some DNA. Remember, they don't have a nuclear membrane around that DNA, it's just DNA. And that bacteria will elongate the DNA, replicates, so you have more of it, so that when the bacteria actually divides in half, each new bacteria gets some of that DNA. So I know my drawing is so awesome. But really that's all mitosis really is you know, a cell elongating and splitting in half, and that's what bacteria do when they divide in your body. They do that over and over and over. So let's quickly review prokaryotes versus eukaryotes. So hopefully you remember some things. Let's start with things they both have, no matter what, all cells. It makes sense that they would all have a membrane around them, outer membrane. Sometimes you'll just see membrane, not outer membrane. I could have also just said plasma membrane, which you learned all about. They all have DNA, even though not all of them have a membrane around that DNA, so not all of them have a nucleus, but they all have DNA. The liquidy stuff that everything floats in, so cytoplasm. And then the organelle, ribosomes. Okay, but let's talk about some of the differences. Which one is smaller? Prokaryotes. The example, bacteria. These are more simple. And there's no nucleus. So we're going to go ahead and say the opposite over here. These are usually larger. Plants and animals have these types of cells. They're more complex. And they actually have their DNA surrounded by a membrane, so they have a nucleus. So, hopefully I'm not going too fast. I'm trying to go slow so you can actually write, but also this video keeps hiccuping, so we'll see how that actually sounds. But every once in a while I'll look up and I'll see that the video paused, so. Okay, let's talk about DNA itself. DNA is a long molecule. When it's unwound or unraveled, it's called chromatin. And it looks like this, just a jumbled mess inside your cell. So go ahead and draw that. But imagine if your cell were to divide that DNA in half so that each new cell can have that DNA. The odds of us being able to split that DNA exactly evenly is pretty low if it's just a jumbled mess. So the cell creates chromosomes out of the DNA to kind of organize it in a really good fashion. So the DNA winds up, or in other words, condenses to become chromosomes. And that can look like when it's all condensed, it'll look like an X. You don't have to, you can just draw an X if you want. That actually is a replicated chromosome. A single chromosome would just look like that. And if you're pulling it to one side of the cell, it kind of looks like it's like being yanked away. And so sometimes you'll see it like this because it's being yanked across the cell, and it just kind of like goes like that, but you don't have to draw that one. So it makes sense that we're going to go from this jumbled mess to organized chromosomes right before the cell divides, because when the cell divides, we want everything organized and neat and it to divide just perfectly in half. And so you can kind of see the chromosome structure. This isn't the greatest picture. It's actually really annoying how hard it is to find good pictures online to show you guys of basic biology things. But here's a chromosome structure. And if you were to unwind it, you would see like a long thread type of material, and they wind around these proteins called histones, and so you can see those as these beads, the histones. But in the end, chromosomes are really just DNA. That's really all it is. Okay, so let's say you have some chromosomes in your cell, and your cell wants to divide. So if I had just a jumbled mess of DNA in my cell, and I wanted that cell to divide in half to make more cells. You don't have to draw this. I would keep dividing my DNA, and eventually I'd run out of DNA. So there is a stage in which the DNA has to replicate and make more, so that when I divide the cell in half, I'm not, depleting my DNA. I'll still have the same amount. So let's say, real quickly, just an example, let's say I had 46 chromosomes. If I were to divide my cell in half, I would keep lowering that number. And if those cells were to divide in half, then I would half that number and half that number. So it kind of gets a little annoying for the cell. So you have to actually double this first. So there's a stage in which 46 will actually double to become 92, and then I can still keep the same number of chromosomes in each cell. So we'll talk about that a little later. But the main point is that when you see the X, that means the chromosome has been copied or replicated. Each side of the chromosome then is identical. We call each side of the chromosome a sister chromatid. And actually, hold on, I'll go back. Each sister chromatid is attached together by something called a centromere. And hopefully you remember that. I think that shows up on the test, but it'll ask what the center of a chromosome is. So center of a chromosome is a centromere. So hopefully that's easy to remember. But let's go back real fast and actually label that on a chromosome. So each one of these sides is called a sister chromatid. And then the middle is the centromere. Okay, so in every single one of your cells, you have 46 chromosomes. Do you think a fly has the same number of chromosomes as you? No, definitely not. So every species has a specific number of chromosomes. We have 46 in every single one of our cells, but other organisms may have only 10, or they might even have like 95 or something like that. Usually it's an even number, 92 or something like that. But you have 46 or 23 pairs, in other words, because you're going to get one set from mom and one set from dad. So there are 23 pairs, 46 total. And here's a picture of the chromosomes. If you see a picture of the chromosomes all laid out nice and neatly, it's called a karyotype. And as you can see, there's 22 what they call autosomes. Not AutoZone. Autosomes. And here's our 23rd pair, but this pair is actually a little special. So they give it letters. And maybe some of you can tell me why they would give them special letters. They determine something very specific about a person. And hopefully some of you guys are thinking they determine the sex. And those consist of an X and a Y, but I mean, not for everybody. Not everyone has an X and a Y. So the Y has DNA that will end up producing male hormones, at least more of them. So XY are the chromosomes that males have. XX are female. So if you were to look at this Y chromosome, you notice that it's shorter than the X, and it actually has the DNA that makes up this chromosome codes for things like testosterone, and it'll produce more of it. So if you see that Y at all in an individual, it indicates male. Well, we might learn a little bit more about how that's not always a simple case. Sometimes you might have an XXY individual or XYY, and then what happens to that person if you have more of that chromosome or less than that chromosome? Does that mean that person is male still, or are they female? So we'll kind of learn a little bit about that if I can get to it. Each one of these, though, has the same type of genes on them, and you can probably guess why there's two. One comes from mom and one comes from dad. I could do that to every single one of these, but I'm not going to. But they have the same type of genes on them. So if this is the area that is telling you from your mom's side to have blue eyes, then this is going to be the area from your dad that is also telling you to have a certain color of eye. Well, usually they use a big B for brown. So let's say that your mom's side is telling you to have brown eyes. Your dad's side, though, is telling you to have blue eyes. So, you know, each area is trying to tell you something about yourself. Sometimes it has to do with height. How tall are you going to be? And these pieces of DNA, you know, are going to kind of fight with one another, and we'll learn about that in genetics. Which one of these is going to win over the other? And sometimes you get a mix of the two. But every pair of these that have the same types of genes on them are called homologous chromosomes. Remember that word, that root word? Homo means same. You don't have to write that. Just remember, we've had that root word several times. So they have the same types of genes. Over here, we might have tallness. So you might have a piece of DNA from your mom telling you to be short, and one from your dad telling you to be tall. So one will win over. And just like we said, one is from mom, one is from dad. And they carry the same types of genes. When they say same genes, you know, obviously that doesn't mean exactly the same, because one might be saying brown, the other saying blue, but it's the same type of genes. So most of our cells have a full set of chromosomes. I don't know if you remember, humans have how many? 46. So a full set is 46, and if most of our cells are like that, and so most of them are what we call diploid, and it's diploid because we typically have, you know, two of each kind, so it's di for two. Sometimes they'll represent diploid number with 2n, because remember I told you that not all organisms have the same number of chromosomes. We have 46, but another might have, 64. So whatever that number is, we represent by 2n. 2 because you typically get one from mom, one from dad, and then n meaning, you know, whatever that number typically is for that organism. But most all of your body cells are going to be that way, have that full set. And body cells, sometimes they call somatic cells. Again, that's like the main job of a biologist, is just to name things, and then sometimes give it a more specific name, and then sometimes an even more specific name. Fun stuff. So all of your body cells, like your nerve cells and your muscle cells, are all going to have 46 chromosomes. Pretty sure that's supposed to be a white blood cell, but there are some cells though that have half the number of chromosomes as every other one, and those are actually your haploid cells. So hopefully you can remember haploid, half, kind of sounds similar. Diploid, think double. So maybe some of you can think of a cell that would have half of the number that every other one would. If you look ahead, you can kind of figure it out. But your sperm and egg are going to have half the number. That should make complete sense to you, that sperm and egg would have half the number as every other one, because if each of these had your normal 46 chromosomes, don't draw this, don't write that, but if each of them had the 46, during fertilization, when they come together, you're going to have double the amount of chromosomes as every other cell in your body. We don't want that. We want the normal 46. That means you're a healthy individual. So those are actually going to have half the number that every other cell in your body has. So go ahead and write that for sure. Write 23 and 23. And then when those come together, that can make that first cell that has a total of 46 chromosomes. When sperm and egg join together, that is called fertilization. Hopefully you've at least heard that word, maybe in health. And that restores that diploid number, that full set, by joining two haploids. The first cell that's formed when they join is called a zygote. Here was your egg, here is your sperm, and then together that makes a zygote. Really, really weird word. After this happens, we've talked about this before, but it's so crazy that you start off as that one little cell, and that's going to have to divide a lot so that you can make an organism. You don't have to draw this part, but eventually you have like this group of cells, and that's called a blastula. Weird word. You don't have to know this part, but some of these cells are obviously going to have to become different. Some of these cells will have to become, for say, skin cells. Others are going to have to become muscle cells. And so that process of becoming different is called differentiation. Actually, let's keep that. Cells become differentiated. The process is called differentiation. cells become differentiated. So now they have certain special tasks, some of them skin, some nerve, some muscle, so on and so forth. And some of you probably know just by looking at this, this is actually how we get twins. So if you have this blastula and for some reason it divides in half and splits into two really early on in the process, this whole part will become a human, this whole part will become a human, and that's identical twins. So non-identical twins would be if we had, if the woman, instead of releasing one egg, had released two, and so she had another egg released, and so this one got fertilized, but then this one over here also got fertilized. But these would have slightly different DNA. We'll talk about that later. And so these would be non-identical humans, non-identical, well, yeah, they are humans, but non-identical twins. This would create identical twins. So just some interesting stuff. Hopefully I didn't go too fast. And tomorrow we'll learn more about our karyotypes and how doctors can take a picture of your chromosomes. Then they can organize them neatly like this into this picture, and they can see if there's something wrong. So it's actually kind of funny because right here you should have a pair of every chromosomes. What do we notice here? We are missing one. So we should have two of every chromosome, but we're missing one right here. So tomorrow or the next day, you're going to see what happens if you're missing a chromosome. Sometimes people have an extra chromosome. And I'll tell you right now, if it's a little chromosome, it's usually not as big of a deal. It still has some pretty big effects that affect the person quite a bit. But if it's one of these huge pieces of DNA that's missing or is extra, then that fetus that has that actually usually doesn't even survive. So, but we will talk about what happens if one of these shorter ones is missing or you have an extra one. So, hope you guys are having a good day.